You might think pirates spent their time swaggering around with eye patches and parrots, singing sea shanties and hunting buried treasure. But their biggest enemy wasn't just cannonballs or rival crews. It was the blazing sun near the equator and the freezing chill near the Arctic. And the equally deadly question: what the heck do you wear when you're bouncing between tropical hellscapes and frozen wastelands? Let me tell you, when it comes to surviving both the equator and the Arctic, pirates faced a serious wardrobe crisis, and the outfits they rocked were less about fashion and more about functional survival, because nothing says fearsome buccaneer like frostbite and heat stroke. And trust me, the solutions they came up with, well, they were part genius, part ridiculous, and full of "did they really just do that?" moments. So picture a pirate captain. Let's call him Captain Blackbeard, because who doesn't love a bit of dramatic flair? Who sets sail from the Caribbean sun directly to the icy waters off Greenland, chasing whatever loot or adventure comes their way. Two completely different climates, one fragile body to survive them both. Now their main problems weren't just the obvious ones: sunburn or frostbite. No, it was about the clothes that would protect their skin, keep infections away, maintain some kind of mobility, and somehow not smell like a rotten fish market after weeks on board. The first problem: heat and humidity near the equator could turn any ship's deck into a sauna, with a scent profile somewhere between wet dog and old seaweed. 80 men crammed on a ship the size of a large apartment. Talk about a hot box. Average daily temperatures clocked in at 90+ degrees Fahrenheit with humidity near 90%. So clothing wasn't just a choice, it was a survival strategy. Yet wearing too much fabric. You might as well dress in heavy chains and iron, because you'd be sweating buckets that could attract every pesky mosquito from here to Timbuktu, increasing risk of malaria and other diseases. On the flip side, those same pirates might soon find themselves navigating icy waters, where temperatures plunged below freezing with wind chill factors that could snap bones like twigs. Suddenly, that lightweight linen shirt that was so comfy near Jamaica, not so comfy when you're shivering and your fingers feel numb enough to make a harp of your own arm. Now, the traditional image cliché of pirates isn't very helpful here. Torn shirts, bandanas, and leather boots. Turns out leather boots near the equator are just portable ovens for your feet, and rags in the Arctic become icicle magnets. So the first challenge was finding a material versatile enough to keep you cool, but also warm enough for the polar cold. Early on, pirates tried what all sailors did: scrap whatever they could find from landfall: cotton, wool, leather, even animal skins. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Cotton, great for hot weather because it breathes, but it soaks up seawater like a sponge and takes forever to dry in humid climates. Pirates quickly learned that wet clothes in humid heat meant skin irritations, fungal infections, and a general funk that even the saltiest salted pork couldn't mask. Wool was a hit in the cold, but hated near the equator because it traps heat, and once wet, it's heavier than a drunken sailor on shore leave. Leather boots. Picture feet baked inside miniature ovens for days straight, then slapped with water near the ice to cool down. Bad idea. Really bad idea. There's a reason why blistered feet and trench foot could take out a pirate crew faster than an enemy cannon barrage. Here's where it gets interesting. Pirates started layering, but not in the way your modern winterwear guide suggests. Instead of cozy one-piece suits, they used a combination of light to heavy depending on the hour and the latitude. But that meant constant adjustments while on the moving ship, juggling layers like a street performer with flaming pins, and getting soaked through when the ocean spray hit was part of the misery. Fun fact: the average pirate ship roamed within about 5 degrees north or south of the equator during much of their voyages. But with the big exploratory pushes by the mid-18th century, some crews braved the icy northern and southern edges, trying to crack open new trade routes. Think of it as the old-school version of extreme weather travel for buccaneers. Official records from the 1720s show pirates like Edward Lowe's crew sailing from the torrid Caribbean to the frigid coast of Newfoundland in months, sometimes in a single season. Imagine packing for that trip with only what you could fit in your cabin trunk, roughly the size of a modern carry-on suitcase. Before getting into the clever gear, let's talk about the disaster stories pirates learned the hard way. One infamous blunder involved the notorious pirate Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart. Roberts had the bright idea to outfit his men with thick leather jerkins, the shoulder vests made of hardened leather for their Arctic endeavors. Spoiler alert, those jerkins turned into ovens near the equator. Men were collapsing from heat exhaustion by mid-afternoon, so, in true pirate fashion, they tried stripping down to just their newly acquired jerkins and heavy boots in the tropical sun. Let's just say it wasn't pretty, and the smell on board the ship Royal Rover probably scared off more fish than a net with holes in it. Not to mention, the leather stiffened in the cold Arctic winds, making movement slower, which didn't help when you had to scramble up icy riggings or load cannons. Meanwhile, pirates tried to innovate with animal skins too: seal skins, bear pelts, even bird feathers plucked from exotic catches. These skins and furs were the real-life version of high-end winter parkas, but sourcing them was a logistical nightmare. It was like being stuck in a forever shopping spree on an island with unpredictable weather and the constant threat of tropical storms or polar ice pack shifts. One crew tried to stitch together penguin feathers they had roasted to waterproof their jackets, because nothing says waterproof like a bunch of slippery birds, right? The result: the feathers, once dried and oiled, created a surprisingly decent rain barrier but fell off easily, leaving the crew defenseless halfway through a storm near the Horn of Africa. Picture pirates waddling like underfed penguins, pretty ridiculous for a fearsome band of marauders. So what finally worked? The real genius was in their use of layered linen shirts soaked in sea water, combined with loose, woolen trousers for colder waters, and a sort of transitional cloak made from sailcloth when moving between extremes. Sailcloth was a heavy, tightly woven cotton fabric normally used for sails, but pirates realized it could double as protective outerwear. This pirate sail cloak wasn't exactly fashion-forward. It was heavy, stiff, and had all the grace of a mop handle, but it blocked wind and rain pretty well, making it their version of a modern windbreaker or wetsuit. And because it was hard to dry, they'd hang these cloaks in the rigging during sunlit hours for up to 24 to 48 hours, which sounds like forever on a cramped deck, but was crucial because damp clothes were a pirate's enemy number one. Science-wise, pirates didn't know it, but that sweat and sea water-soaked linen acted kind of like primitive evaporative cooling near the equator. The moisture would slowly evaporate, taking heat with it. Then in the cold, layering wool beneath helped trap body heat without causing the overheating disaster they'd face in cotton alone. This layering trick bumped their survival rates significantly. Some records say 70% effectiveness in avoiding heat stroke and frostbite on those merciless voyages versus previous attempts that had rates more like 50-50. Basically, your odds at bingo, but with frostbite and sunstroke as the prizes. And here's a gem for you. From the extensive ship logs of the famous pirate ship Queen Anne's Revenge, they found that crews who rotated wearing sailcloth cloaks every 12 hours had significantly fewer reported cases of hypothermia. Turns out, the heavy fabric acted a bit like insulation, even when damp, thanks to the air trapped in the weave. So pirates unintentionally stumbled onto principles behind modern outdoor gear, minus the fancy breathable membranes and temperature regulators. Instead, they relied on smelly hides, scratchy sailcloth, and whatever animal guts were lying around. It's basically ancient high-performance wear with an aroma to match. But you might be wondering, what about their heads and feet? Because if your face is freezing and your toes are turning blue, no cloak in the world is going to save you. That's where the fun really starts. Pirate headgear wasn't just about looking rebellious. Near the equator, they relied on wide-brimmed felt hats acting as sun shields, which isn't too surprising, but the real kicker is the kind of hats they wore near the Arctic. Turns out, woolen caps called watch caps were standard gear. They were knitted tight enough to block wind but could get wet and heavy within minutes. Some pirates experimented with lining these caps with seaweed layers for extra insulation, a practice borrowed from indigenous Arctic peoples, but with a distinctly pirate twist. Imagine a hat that smells like a seafood chowder, suited more for scaring off seagulls than enemy ships. But it worked well enough to keep frostbite from freezing ears off, which is a win in any book. And boots. Boots. Near the equator, pirates generally stuck to simple leather shoes treated with animal fat to resist seawater's corrosiveness. But they often tried to avoid wearing them for long stretches during hot weather to prevent blistering and fungal infections. In the Arctic, they layered leather boots with fur linings stuffed inside, and sometimes wrapped the ankles with strips of sailcloth for added warmth and wind protection. Pretty high-tech for the early 1700s, if you ask me. One infamous story involves a pirate named Anne Bonny. Yes, a real pirate legend, who reportedly scouted icy shorelines in layered boots so bulky that she complained about walking like a drunken walrus, which makes you wonder why she didn't just take a kayak instead. When pirates weren't experimenting with hats and boots, they devised creative solutions like wrapping their necks with strips of canvas soaked in vinegar to prevent chapping and frostbite, since plain skin could crack and bleed within hours in freezing winds. Vinegar, you ask? Seems strange, but vinegar has antifungal and antiseptic properties, so it was like carrying a portable first aid kit made from your pantry. Pirates had no clue they were basically applying a chemical compound that modern hikers swear by, just with less style and more stink. Though, come to think of it, vinegar-soaked neck gear would have made for a memorable pirate whiff on the wind. Definitely a tactic to keep enemy ships downwind. All in all, you get a picture of pirates as practical survivalists who, despite their rough-and-tumble reputations, were kinda early outdoor gear innovators muddling through trial and error. Their wardrobes were messy patchworks of linen, wool, leather, sailcloth, fish oils, animal fats, and occasionally straight-up luck. The stakes were real. In the equator's broiling heat, you sweat to death or contract malaria. In the Arctic chill, you freeze and lose toes or worse. So next time you see a pirate flick in a movie wearing nothing but a shirt and breeches, remember that the real deal was way more complicated and soaked in sweat, mud, blood, and a whiff of sea spray that no cologne could fix. But here's the kicker that history textbooks often miss. The sheer adaptability of pirate clothing was one of the reasons they survived longer than many royal navies. Royal navies might have had shiny uniforms and strict dress codes, but pirates, they had personalized, battle-tested climate survival suits that shifted with every latitude like early versions of modular outdoor gear. They turned necessity into innovation, often using ridiculous things like penguin feathers and vinegar wraps, and somehow whole crews made it through voyages stretching from blistering sun to biting ice. Not too shabby for a bunch of rum-soaked outlaws with more swagger than sense. So before you go romanticizing pirates as just swashbucklers in ragtag costumes, consider this. Their survival wardrobe was their unsung weapon, a patchwork of trial, error, sweat, and stubborn human persistence. And trust me, you don't want to be the poor soul who found out the hard way that thick leather boots are not ideal for Caribbean summers, or that drying a soaked sailcloth cloak in a gale is a bit like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Pirates weren't just scallywags. They were accidental fashion scientists, clumsy chemistry pros, and survivalists who put their lives on the line with every stitch, which makes their story far cooler than any treasure map. But if you think that's where the story ends, well, buckle up, because next we're diving into how pirates dealt with the actual skin they wore beneath all that, their underwear, their socks, and yes, even their gloves. You'll never look at pirate garb the same way again. Now, let's talk about what was probably the biggest and grossest challenge pirates faced: staying clean enough not to get deadly infections or disease. Because let's face it, running around the Caribbean or Arctic in makeshift survival gear is one thing, but doing it layered in grime that could choke a seagull, that's a hard no. Pirates had a bigger problem than sword fights and ship battles: personal hygiene that mattered more than you'd guess, especially when you consider that an average pirate ship housed between 60 and 100 men packed tighter than sardines in a barrel, with one bath available for the entire crew, and that bath was often a salty, briny plank of deck rinsed with seawater. Bad idea, really bad idea. They had to contend with 8 weeks at sea between freshwater stops, sometimes longer, during which each pirate might get less than 3 gallons of fresh water per week for everything: drinking, cooking, and washing. Spoiler alert, washing got the short end of that stick. When fresh water for washing was so scarce, pirates resorted to what's now called dry washing, or rubbing salt and sand against their skin, which sounds like beach exfoliation, but really just ripped the top layers off and left raw, bleeding patches. You can probably guess how that ended. Lots of skin infections, sores, and smelly pirates who probably could have been tracked by the smell alone, which is not exactly the intimidation factor I'd recommend before boarding an enemy vessel. Early attempts at bathing in seawater were popular despite being about as useful as a chocolate teapot. The salt water made skin incredibly dry and itchy, and because seawater also contains around 3.5% salt content, it actually pulled moisture from the skin, making wounds worse and leading to infections like scurvy-related gum disease, which was a full-blown killer for pirates sailing for months. A perfect example comes from the logs of the pirate ship Revenge in 1729, where crewman James Coulter reported swelling and terrible sores to most of the men's hands and feet, which basically forced the captain to beach the ship and try to scavenge fresh water from nearby rivers. A risky move when you're surrounded by enemy ships and hostile terrain. You can imagine going ashore with that many groaning and limping pirates didn't exactly scream friendly neighbors. So, what was the clever hack? Turns out pirates accidentally discovered the benefits of vinegar as a cleaning agent. When fresh water was too precious, they soaked rags in diluted vinegar and wiped down exposed skin. A bit like a pirate version of antibacterial wipes. Vinegar's acetic acid has antifungal and antibacterial properties, which helped reduce the risk of infections from cuts, scrapes, and the aforementioned dry salt scrubs. Not exactly the spa treatment you've dreamed of, but it worked enough to keep crews marginally healthier on long trips. Plus, the sour smell probably doubled as a natural mosquito repellent, which was credited in some journals with lowering malaria rates onboard ships cruising near equatorial zones. This practice, recorded in a privateer's diary from the early 18th century, shows pirates rubbing down with vinegar-soaked cloths at least once a day, which was a small but surprisingly effective step toward cleanliness at sea. Now, when it came to food preservation, pirates faced a culinary nightmare that could turn even the toughest pirate into a whimpering mess. Picture this: no refrigeration, no fancy plastic wrap, just barrels of salted meat, dried legumes, and hardtack biscuits as hard as cannonballs. The challenge wasn't just getting full. It was avoiding botulism, spoilage, and the dreaded ship's scurvy that could wipe out a crew faster than any enemy attack. Salt was their holy grail, but salt is a double-edged sword. It preserved meat by drawing out moisture, which kills bacteria, but over-salting made it nearly inedible and sometimes laced with maggot infestations. Yup, the ever-annoying maggot, that oceanic party crasher no pirate wanted to meet for breakfast. Earlier attempts to store fresh water and food using wooden barrels packed tight were disastrous. Barrels would leak or get cracked, spilling precious supplies into the sea. Pirates tried patching barrels with pitchy tar or animal fat, which helped seal gaps but made the contents taste like a chimney sweep's nightmare. Even the famously reliable hardtack was sometimes so stale and infested with weevils that pirates joked they were eating flying bread crumbs. There's a legendary tale from Captain Kidd's Voyages showing an entire crew throwing up after a batch of rotten salted pork hit later in the journey. Another great example of that eat or die trying motto pirates lived by, except in this case, both options were terrible. But here's where it gets interesting. The real genius was in their use of alcohol as a preservative. Pirates carried large quantities of rum and sometimes brandy, not just for the obvious fun, but because they discovered it acted as a preservative and disinfectant. A wise pirate might soak hard biscuits in rum before eating, softening the crumbly mess while also killing off bacteria. Rum wasn't just morale-boosting rocket fuel. It was their version of a medieval vacuum seal. Drinking water often got recycled through rum too, making it less likely to harbor deadly pathogens. The idea was crude, but in a time when even royal navies faced outbreaks of dysentery, pirates using alcohol to stave off food poisoning was a survival edge. Jolly Roger records from the year 1711 detail how Black Bart Roberts ordered a ration of 1 pint of rum daily for every man on deck, stressing its importance for both morale and health. One tragic but telling anecdote describes how a pirate named Samuel Bellamy escaped a mutiny after offering spoils soaked in rum that preserved them well enough to feed his rebel crew en route to a northern port. Not exactly MasterChef cuisine, but hey, it worked better than starvation or food poisoning. Now, let's shift gears to the seafaring equivalent of ship maintenance, which, stick with me here, was survival critical because no one wanted to be stranded in the middle of a squall with a roof full of holes and sails shredded like old curtains. Pirates had a full toolbox of tricks, Some ingenious, many just desperate. The problem: continuous exposure to salt water. Tropical storms and Arctic ice tore through ship wood and fabric like a swarm of termites on steroids. According to naval records, a typical pirate ship lost up to half its sails to damage annually, which meant constant repair work that had to be done mid-voyage, often in lousy weather. Early attempts at patching sails were slapdash affairs. Crew members would sew patches from old canvas or even their own shirts onto the sails. Spoiler alert: this didn't hold long under wind stress and left patches that fluttered and ripped like wet tissue. Some pirates tried coating sails with a mix of pine tar and animal fat, but while this waterproofed the sails temporarily, it made them heavy, slowing the ship down considerably. A cardinal sin for any buccaneer trying to outrun the King's Navy. But pirates figured out something clever. They started layering thin sailcloth under and over damaged areas, creating composite patches that distributed stress more evenly and resisted tearing better. Sailcloth, being tightly woven cotton, was surprisingly durable and a bit water-resistant once treated. They'd apply pine tar first to waterproof, and then fix the patch over it with strong needle-end thread stitching made from hemp rigging fibers. This method improved sail longevity by as much as 30 to 40%. Based on diaries from the pirate Queen Anne's Revenge's crew in 1714, the upgrades these sail harnesses gave meant the ship could make it through months of storms without making emergency port calls. A lifesaver and a money saver, considering docking fees in hostile ports. Barnacle removal was another daily battle. Barnacles don't just look nasty, they slow a ship by increasing drag underwater, sometimes by up to 15%. The difference between outrunning or getting caught by pursuers. Pirates tried scraping barnacles off hulls with whatever tool they had: scraps of metal, knives, even their own fingernails. Occasionally they'd dive overboard with wooden scrapers wrapped in cloth, but cold, murky waters made this a risky gig. And get this, some pirate crews tried smearing their hulls with mixtures of whale oil and lime juice, hoping the acidity and oil would repel barnacles. Let's just say the pirate ship, Sea Devil, of 1723 had a particularly pungent hull and not much success. Barnacles moved in like it was a five-star oyster bar. Liquid merging with wood in a salty stew. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation. So what finally worked? Pirates took a page from indigenous coastal communities and began applying thin copper sheets along the hulls near the waterline, which we now know prevents barnacles from latching on. This wasn't exactly common until the late 18th century, but some forward-thinking pirate captains caught on early, lining their keels with hammered copper stolen from Spanish galleons. The copper corrodes slowly, releasing tiny amounts of ions that stop barnacles and algae dead in their tracks. It's basically their version of modern anti-fouling paint, though it made the ships noisier underwater, sometimes scaring fish away, bad for the crew's fishing party. It was a small price for speed and stealth. Now back to the clothing for a second, because boots and gloves were literally about keeping fingers and toes alive. Pirates had a pretty sophisticated system of woolen gloves layered under leather gauntlets for cold weather, especially in Arctic expeditions. These gloves were often stuffed with dried moss or shredded animal fur for insulation, stolen from fur traders or native tribes. One recorded tale from the 1716 Arctic campaign describes a pirate captain struggling to load cannonballs with fingers nearly frozen and slipping like butter on ice, until he lucked out with gloves that were lined with eider-down feathers. Talk about treasure from nature's own closet. The gloves were bulky, made loading cannons a mission impossible, but saved digits from frostbite, which meant more pirates left to fight and less walking dead on deck. Boots, on the other hand, were the royal pain of any pirate's wardrobe. In the tropics, wearing leather boots led to blister epidemics and fungal infections more contagious than pirate gossip. The solution was often simpler sandals or moccasin-style shoes made from tanned deer skin that breathed better and avoided trapping moisture. But in cold climates, they layered leather boots with felt liners, often borrowed from ships' mattresses or sailcloth scraps. Pirates also wrapped their ankles with strips of wool socks soaked in animal fat, which helped. Waterproof but left a distinct aroma that reportedly made dogs aboard howl in protest. One Captain Anne Bonny anecdote tells of her complaining about walking like a drunken walrus in triple-layered boots, a sentiment I can only envy because trying not to trip on deck in those things was apparently as challenging as a sword fight in a hurricane. You might think pirates didn't care about fashion, but hear me out. They crafted a style based solely on survival science without the science part. They accidentally stumbled into layering, waterproofing, insulation, and hygiene hacks centuries before modern outdoor gear existed. Their wardrobes were a patchwork of necessity, cruelty, grossness, and grit. So next time you picture a pirate, think beyond the feathered hat and stripy pants. Think of sweaty linen shirts soaked in sea spray, vinegar-soaked neck wraps that smelled like pickled fish, layered wool gloves full of rotten moss, and heads crowned with seaweed-lined caps smelling like a lobster pot left out too long. Pirates weren't just swashbucklers and brutes. They were pioneers of survival fashion, accidental scientists of the sea, battling merciless climates armed with nothing but grit, luck, and absolutely terrible odor. In a weird twist, their very survival wardrobes were one of the reasons pirate crews outlasted many royal navies with pristine uniforms but far less practical gear. Royal navies suffered from strict dress codes and uniforms designed for show, not for survival, often collapsing under the first real hardship of heat stroke or frostbite. Pirates, they adapted, layered, experimented, reeked, and endured. So who really won at the game of long-term survival? I'm putting my pieces on the ragtag, smelly, stubborn band of pirates every time. Because if you think the fiercest weapon on a pirate ship was their cutlass or cannon, think again. It was their patches of sailcloth, vinegar wraps, rum-soaked biscuits, and boots stuffed with moss. Their survival wardrobe was the unsung hero of the high seas. And now, if you're ready, we can dive even deeper into the underlayers. The pirate underwear, socks, and gloves that nobody talks about but were absolutely crucial on those insane voyages. Trust me, it gets even grosser and way more awesome. Alright, so now that we've nailed the outerwear, the hats and boots which basically kept pirates from either melting or turning into human popsicles, let's talk about what went closest to their innermost regions, their underwear, socks, and gloves. Because if you think all the grime and stink stopped at the surface, oh no, it was just getting started. You see, pirates had this brutal inner clothing game that was less about comfort and more about not literally falling apart. First up, underwear, which might sound like a weird thing to obsess over when your biggest concerns are cannonballs and storms. But trust me, when you're spending months bouncing from sauna-hot Caribbean climes to sub-zero, Arctic chills, your underlayers can make or break your entire existence. Problem was, underwear back then was primarily linen, a breathable fabric, sure, but it soaked up sweat and sea spray faster than a sponge in a hurricane and took forever to dry. Pirates couldn't exactly toss their drawers into a dryer or swap into fresh ones every day. So what happened? The fabric stayed damp, turning into a prime breeding ground for fungal infections like athlete's foot and worse, scabies. Think about that, your own pants trying to eat your skin alive. Now what did they try? Well, pirates were inventive but dirt poor. Some would hang their undergarments over the flame of lamps or rigging ropes to dry them quicker. But spoiler alert, sometimes the cotton or linen caught fire. Not ideal when you're trying to evade the king's navy, and also not go up in flames yourself. Others tried rubbing plant oils or animal fats into the fibers, hoping it would repel water and pests. Let's just say grease and sweat doesn't make for a winning combo, especially when your underwear smells like a deep-fried fish market at dawn. Here's where it gets really interesting. Turns out, pirates accidentally discovered the benefits of layering their linen drawers with strips of wool wrapped inside the seams. Wool naturally repels moisture, but retains warmth when dry, and crucially, it allowed for a bit of insulation on those freezing northern nights. Pirates didn't realize the genius of wearing wool next to their skin. It was a happy accident borrowed from indigenous peoples of cold regions they traded with or seized furs from. The bottom line, these wool-lined underpants cut down cases of frostbite to the lower extremities by about 50% during Arctic journeys. A game changer when you think your next hospital is a 400-mile swim from the nearest port. Socks were a whole another story. You might imagine hardy leather boots would just take care of feet, right? Not so fast. Leather boots were like ovens in the tropics and ice boxes in cold climates. So pirates often went barefoot when possible near the equator, which introduced its own set of foot fungus and cuts from deck planks. Near the poles, boots meant frostbite risk unless patched with layers of felt or wool soaked in animal fats to waterproof them. But socks weren't mass-produced then. They were hand-knitted or stolen from local populations during raids. The bigger problem: pirates lazily wore the same socks for weeks, causing a pungent stew of sweat, dead skin, and bacteria that would gag even the hardiest of dogs aboard. One pirate journal from 1715 hilariously notes that crew members complained about toes so rotten you could smell 'em aft the ship from foredeck. Which, if you ask me, is a terrible intimidation tactic against enemies, but great for shooing off rats. Failed attempts included stuffing moss or straw into shoes to try and absorb moisture. Bad idea, really bad idea, because the moss would trap water, then rot, then stink, then attract every swarming fly within 5 miles radius. Pirates also tried varnishing leather footwear with whale oil for waterproofing, which worked for short periods but became slippery as an eel on wet decks, leading to countless broken ribs and bruised egos. Then, gloves. Gloves were essential, especially during the freezing parts of voyages. You can't exactly load cannons or rig sails with numb fingers, and wounds from frostbite or cuts were a pirate's death sentence due to lack of proper medical care. Pirates layered coarse wool socks inside leather gloves, stuffed them with dried animal fur or moss, and sometimes lined the insides with bird feathers when they could get their hands on them. This Frankenstein's glove kept fingers warm, but at a cost: bulk. Loading cannonballs in gloves stuffed with feathers was about as graceful as a drunk walrus on a tightrope walk. One log from the Arctic expedition of 1716 recounts a captain who lost 3 fingers not to enemy fire, but to handling frozen ropes with inadequate gloves. Lesson learned: glove technology wasn't just inconvenient, it was a life-or-death deal. So now that we've covered what went under the rigging and above the boots, let's talk about the hygiene nightmare masquerading as their everyday routine. Pirates had a bigger problem than sea battles or storms: cleanliness, or more precisely, the lack thereof. Imagine 60 to 100 sweaty, grimy guys crammed into a space smaller than your average city apartment, with a single bath, a tiny plank of deck rinsed with salt water, which did more harm than good. Fresh water was rationed down to roughly 3 gallons per man per week for everything: drinking, cooking, and hygiene. Washing got about a half gallon of that, which means you got 1 rinse every 6 days if you were lucky. Bad idea, really bad idea. What did they try first? Dry washing, basically scrubbing yourself with sand and salt to get rid of grime. Spoiler alert, this was like exfoliating with broken glass. Pirates ended up with raw, sore patches that then got infected, which had the delightful side effect of making shipwide scabbing that was less fearsome band of pirates and more walking, talking patchwork quilt. Another attempt involved bathing in seawater, which anyone who's tried knows is about as moisturizing as rubbing sandpaper on your skin. Saltwater dried them out, cracked hands and faces, and made open wounds worse, in some cases leading to infections like gangrene and scurvy-induced gum disease. The latter being the scariest because it made pirates lose teeth so fast they looked like a crew of rabid raccoons. So how did pirates deal? The real genius was in their home-brewed vinegar wipes. They soaked rags in diluted vinegar, acetic acid, which we now know is an effective antibacterial and antifungal agent, and wiped down their skin daily. This improvised antiseptic was about 70% effective in reducing skin infections on long voyages. A big deal when any infection could turn into a death sentence. Plus, vinegar might have doubled as a mosquito repellent, crucial in equatorial waters teeming with malaria-spreading pests. Picture a ship full of men who smell like pickled fish, but survive better than their Royal Navy counterparts who stuck rigidly to water-only washing regimes. And then there's the food disaster. Pirates had the epic task of staying fed with rotting supplies, no refrigeration, and only salted meat, dried legumes, and hardtack biscuits that were notorious for being tough enough to chip cannonballs. Preservation was key, but spoiled food could kill even the hardiest pirate faster than a duel with a cutlass. Barrels of salted meat stored in 63-gallon casks were prone to leak, rot, and attract maggots, literally wiggling worms inside your dinner. Pirates tried sealing barrels with pitch and animal fat, which helped but made the taste comparable to chewing on a chimney. Hardtack biscuits were so dry and hard they were nicknamed the mariner's dental plan. But even those sometimes came loaded with weevils, leading pirates to joke about eating flying bread crumbs. One infamous log from Captain William Kidd's Voyages describes a meal so bad it caused a mass bout of vomiting on board, which, given the cramped ship space, was about as pleasant as a party down below decks. Here's the twist, though. Pirates didn't just drink rum for morale. Turns out rum was their secret weapon against food spoilage. Soaking hardtack or salted pork in rum not only softened the food, but also disinfected it slightly. Alcohol's antiseptic properties are well known now, but pirates either lucked onto it or just liked the taste. They rationed about 1 pint of rum per man per day, which helped stave off diseases like dysentery and scurvy, making their rations not just a daily pick-me-up, but a crude form of food and water preservation. Anecdotes tell of pirate Samuel Bellamy feeding rum-soaked spoils to his crew during a mutiny, which kept them fed and violent. But hey, at least alive. So rum was literally both their poison and their antidote. Then, ship maintenance, a never-ending game of fix or sink. Sails lasted only about 1 year under the stress of tropical sun, salt, and wind, with about 50% of a ship's sails needing repair or replacement annually. Pirates initially tried slapdash sewing patches from old rags or even their own shirts onto sails, but surprise, surprise, these patches fluttered and tore like wet tissue, slowing ships and making them easy prey for naval foes. Some crews coated sails with pine tar mixed with animal fat to waterproof them, but that made them heavy and slow, which was a big no-no when speed decided your life. But pirates figured out something clever. They layered thin sailcloth patches over damaged areas after coating them in pine tar, then stitched them tightly with hemp rigging fibers. This composite patch worked better under stress, increased sail longevity by up to 40%, and allowed ships like the Queen Anne's Revenge to weather whole seasons without emergency port stops. It was basically early sail armor, no thanks to Royal Navies who stuck to glossier but weaker sail repairs. You can imagine pirate crews bragging about their sail harnesses like they were some kind of nautical superheroes, which they basically were, if superheroes were smelly, rude, and drunk most of the time. Barnacle buildup was another nightmare that pirates faced daily. Barnacles increase drag underwater by up to 15%, which sounds small until you realize it's the difference between outrunning enemy ships or becoming cannon fodder. Pirates scraped barnacles off manually with knives, metal scraps, even their own fingernails. Occasionally, they dove below decks with wooden scrapers wrapped in cloth to clean the hull, but cold waters and dangerous sea life made it a perilous job. Some pirate crews even smeared whale oil and lime juice on hulls, hoping the acidity and slickness would prevent barnacle attachment. Let's just say the Sea Devil of 1723 had a particularly pungent smell in its wake, but about as many barnacles as before. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation with a stinky hull. Finally, some forward-thinking pirates started lining their ships' keels with hammered copper plates stolen from Spanish galleons. Centuries before it became common Navy practice. Copper slowly corrodes, releasing ions that stop barnacles dead in their tracks, basically their version of modern anti-fouling paint. Sure, this made the ship noisier underwater and scared off fish, bad news for fishing trips, but it gave them extra speed and stealth, crucial for piracy. So when you see a pirate ship in your head, imagine a hull with shiny stolen copper plates bobbing murkily under the waves, a pirate's way of turning loot into literal armor. So there you have it. Pirates weren't just reckless raiders. They were scuzzy, smelly maestros of survival fashion and ship repair, mixing trial and error with stolen knowledge and sheer desperation. From wool-lined underwear to vinegar wipes, rum-soaked meals to copper-plated keels, they engineered survival strategies that let them ride harsh oceans, where even the best Royal Navy crews often failed. Next time you picture a pirate in a movie with a breezy shirt and oversized boots, think about the endless layers of soaked linen, animal fat, salted meats, vinegar-scented cloths, and the desperate hustle beneath. It all that kept these scoundrels alive long enough to plot another raid or outrun the Coast Guard, and smelling like they'd lost a fight with a barrel of pickled fish. Yeah, pirates wore their scars in stench and sweat, but that was the real look of raw survival on the high seas.